Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this December 15th, 2013 edition of Nightcast. And in the news tonight, China. Their robotic Jade Rabbit lunar rover has driven off its landing module and onto the moon's surface. Now, what does this mean for the world and the United States? You know, friends, the United States was the first one to land on the moon, to get a man on the moon. Now, China has, there's not a man in this vehicle, but it's managed to get a safe landing with a vehicle on the moon, and now it's going to be exploring to look for minerals that China can take back. And you know, psychologically, this is going to do a lot for China. China's already building up its military weaponry, its navy, and there are prophecies ahead for a huge army in Europe that a lot of it's probably going to come from China. But the robotic vehicle that rolled down a ramp lowered by the lander and then onto the volcanic plain known as the Sinus Iridium, I think it's called. The six-wheeled rover carries a sophisticated payload, including ground-penetrating radar, which will gather measurements of the lunar soil and crust. Helen Fox has a detailed report in this video.
This is one of the first photographs of China's mission to the moon. The robotic rover is safely on the lunar surface. On board is the Chinese national flag. Earlier, the rover was driven off the lander and onto a lava plain, which is known as the Bay of Rainbows. The rover and the lander taking images of each other. This comes a day after the soft landing. Computer animation was used to show the progress of the space mission, the mooncraft carefully manoeuvring into place before touchdown, much to the delight of the control room. The rover, which is called Jade Rabbit, will now spend 3 months exploring the surface. It's the first wheeled vehicle on the moon since the 1970s. This is just the latest step in China's ambitious space program. Helen Fox, BBC News.
Okay, and friends, you know, usually when you noticed in the report that China has its flag on this, the China flag on there. Now, usually when a country gets somewhere first that's never been inhabited by man before, it plants its flag, it claims the rights to it. Now, the United States got there first, carried its flag, and wouldn't that make the moon a possession of the United States? You know, first claim. Okay, but the United States, anyway. There's a lot more going on the earth we need to be concerned about, really, I think, than who has possession of the moon or that kind of thing. And one thing we need to be concerned about is how the EU is going to shape up. And there's a story very much related to that in the news tonight. There's a huge rally in Kiev in support of closer ties with the EU. Some 200,000 people have rallied in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, to protest against President Viktor Yanukovych's refusal to sign a landmark EU deal. Mr. Yanukovych backed out of signing the association agreement after months of negotiation, apparently under strong pressure from Russia. Even though we showed you a video last week with a Russian senator saying, no, we didn't put any pressure on the Ukraine. The president of the Ukraine, though, Viktor Yanukovych, is to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday. The EU has put any new talks on the agreement on hold, on the agreement for an EU tie with the Ukraine. They've put those on hold until there's a clear commitment to sign. Daniel Sanford reports from the Ukraine.
Kiev's enormous Independence Square, the Maidan. The crowd stretching into the distance down the city's main street. Another vast sea of Ukrainians expressing their fury at their government.
They don't understand that they act in the very childish, stupid way. This is what keeps, I think, people coming and fighting.
We want to live in Europe because it's good for us, for all people in Ukraine. We can't live in Russia.
It's the third Sunday in a row that a huge crowd has gathered here on the Maidan in Kiev, calling for revolution, saying that they want Ukraine to go towards Europe and not back towards Russia.
The demonstrations first started when the government pulled out of an agreement to move towards joining the European Union. Now Europe's own negotiators have suspended talks, saying the Ukrainian government's arguments are no longer based on reality. Opposition leaders like world champion boxer Vitaly Klitschko are worried that President Yanukovych is about to do a deal to join Russia's rival customs union.
We expect he wants to sign the custom agreement. It's the people not agree with that. 70% of European population want to see Ukraine as part of European family, and that's why if Yanukovych do it different things, it can bring the temperature in society much higher.
Up the hill, warm food being served at a pro-government demonstration. There are millions of Ukrainians, mostly in the east, who fear that severing ties with Russia will be bad for business and bad for jobs.
Europe is Europe, but Russia is our homeland. We live together. Our brothers and sisters live there now, so we should be like family.
But these supporters of the president are struggling to be heard. As the crisis continues, they're being drowned out by their much more passionate and much noisier neighbours down the road. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Kiev.
And friends, in the Middle East, in Israel and on the Gaza Strip, there's been torrential rains and flooding and snow in Israel. More than 5,000 people in the Gaza Strip have been evacuated from their homes because of severe floods caused by torrential rains. Rescuers have had to use rowing boats to reach residents trapped by rising floodwaters. The winter storm called Alexa has covered parts of the West Bank and Israel with heavy snow. Yolande Nail reports.
United Nations officials have described parts of the northern Gaza Strip as a disaster area. Rescuers have had to use rowing boats to reach residents trapped by rising floodwaters, said to be 2 meters deep in some places. Gaza's Hamas government says thousands of people have been moved to schools and other temporary shelters after the heavy rain over the past 4 days.
We ask the whole world to look upon Gaza with sympathy because the damage is huge. If the rain had continued for another few hours, I would have lost all my money.
The seedlings have been damaged and the strawberries have been polluted. This farm cost me around $15,000 and I didn't gain 1 shekel from it.
Many homes in the coastal strip are poorly built and it lacks basic infrastructure. Israel and Egypt imposed tight border restrictions on Gaza. Since last month, its one power plant has been shut down after cheap fuel supplies from Egypt were cut. Severe weather has caused disruption across the region. Heavy snow has fallen in Palestinian cities in the West Bank, including Ramallah and Hebron, as well as Jerusalem and parts of Israel's northern Galilee. The Israeli authorities eased a travel ban for the Jewish Sabbath to run trains to Tel Aviv after many roads became blocked.
Okay, and friends, two warships, one from Denmark, one from Norway, are preparing to sail to Syria to assist with the removal of the country's chemical weapons. They will accompany two cargo ships, which will receive the stockpiles of weapons before transferring at least some of them to a U.S. ship for destruction. Syria has agreed to surrender its most deadly chemical weapons by the end of 2013. After Katharina Moe gives her report in this video, I'll remind us who Norway and Denmark are.
This is an ongoing training exercise.
Assembled and awaiting orders to go, the special Norwegian-Danish Marine Task Force is being readied for deployment to help remove the first part of Syria's deadly chemical arsenal. Under a deal struck between the US and Russia, Syria must surrender its stockpile of lethal toxins. It comes after 1,400 people were allegedly gassed near Damascus in August.
My job right now is to prepare this task group capable of transporting chemical agents out of the port of Latakia in Syria to a so far not identified destination for ongoing further destruction.
Currently anchored in Cyprus, the plan is for the warships to escort two cargo ships that will receive the chemical agents. The Syrian army will put them in sealed containers fitted with GPS devices.
With regards to challenges, it's always unknown what is going to happen. And that's the reason why we have this robust force package consisting of all these specialists, as I mentioned earlier. And that is what we're preparing. We're preparing ourselves for the worst case scenario.
Earlier this month, US officials said sea trials had been planned with equipment that could neutralize deadly chemicals.
I think the plan is that we'll be heading for a harbor where we'll meet an American ship, and they have this field deployable hydrolysis system on board, and they will take at least the two Schedule 1 chemicals on board, and they will destroy them at sea.
Damascus has declared 1,290 tons of chemical weapons and toxins. Officers say the task force will go as many times as it takes to remove it all. Under the agreement, the deadliest chemicals in Syria's stockpile must be relinquished by the end of the year. Katharina Moe, BBC News.
Thank you, Katharina Moe. And, I was going to tell you this. I have a slide on the screen. I'll bring it forward, and you can see for yourself that under the second one down it says Benjamin, that's Norway, and the next one down, Dan, Denmark, and Denmark and Norway were cooperating in this effort to remove the chemicals from Syria, and of course they're cooperating with the United States, which I believe we have that listed here. If you go down to should be Manasseh showing on here somewhere. There's Ephraim. Oh, there's Manasseh. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 down. That's the United States of America. All of these are brothers, part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And, there's a mention in the Bible in James 1, verse 1, where the Apostle James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, says he's introducing his letter to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. As you can see the wording in the first verse of the first chapter of James. Okay, I just mentioned that briefly tonight just as a side point because two of those brothers are sending over their ships to get the bulk of the chemical weapons out of Syria, and then they'll transfer them to a U.S. ship that'll take them out and destroy them. At least 7 people have been killed in Bangladesh during protests sparked by the execution of Abdul Qadir Mullah, an Islamist opposition leader. There have been pitched battles between the security forces and activists of the Jamaat-e-Islami party, which called a general strike across the country. Now, those 7 people were killed during the protest. About 25 people have been killed in clashes since Abdul Qadir Mullah was executed on Thursday of last week for crimes against humanity committed during Bangladesh's War of Independence from Pakistan in 1971. And Barashan Ethanrajan has this report.
Islamist activists on the streets to enforce a countrywide general strike. They threw homemade bombs and put up barricades to ensure people remained indoors. Soon, clashes broke out. Police retaliated with massive force. Rubber bullets were fired as the police tried to bring the situation under control. Similar clashes have been reported in many parts of Bangladesh. Around 25 people have been killed since last Thursday night. The latest clashes were sparked by the execution of this man, Abdul Qadir Mullah, a senior leader of the Jamaat-e-Islami party. He was found guilty of crimes against humanity during the country's independence war in 1971. But human rights activists have criticized the trial, saying it falls short of international standards. However, many Bangladeshis support the execution and some feel it's long overdue. No doubt, the war crimes trials have polarized this nation. The country is already reeling under weeks of transport blockade by the main opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party. The BNP wants the Prime Minister to resign before the elections due in January. The protests by Islamists have added to the tension. Bangladesh is on the edge as the country prepares for yet another round of unrest. Anbaras Nethirajan, BBC News.
Friends, I noticed in the archive I had a piece of video that I maybe should have showed you right after the two ships that are picking up the chemical weaponry in Syria. But I'll show it to you now. It's from October, a couple of months ago, that shows dozens of rebel groups announcing that they are breaking away from political opposition groups. With so many individual rebel groups now operating across Syria, there are increasing reports of infighting and defection. Now again, this report is from October this year, with Lena Sinjab reporting.
Who is fighting who in Syria? Well, it's not as simple as official forces versus rebels. The main rebel group, the Free Syrian Army, or FSA, was formed in late 2011 by civilians and army defectors. But many different anti-government brigades and battalions sprang up across Syria. An internationally backed meeting was called to try and unify them, and the Supreme Military Council was established. 5 military councils were appointed to different fronts within the country. General Salim Idris heads the control room in Turkey and tries to coordinate fighting. But hundreds of groups are affiliated with the Supreme Military Council, and they don't always agree. And it gets more complicated. There are also fighters with links to Al-Qaeda. The most well-known is the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, or ISIS, made up of mainly foreign fighters with a radical Islamist agenda. They are opposed by most of the rebels. So, where are they all? The suburbs of Damascus are mainly controlled by moderate Islamists, but there are also secular groups, especially further south. The government controls most of Homs, but some areas are controlled by Islamist or moderate rebels. Hama and the coast are also mainly under government control, but there are rebels in the mountains around Idlib, with Al-Qaeda fighters the most powerful there. And on the eastern front, there is another group in the mix, with Kurdish rebels joining the fight. It's most complicated in the north. Almost all the different brigades operate here, with fierce clashes taking place between Al-Qaeda's ISIS and the FSA. And it's this development that has forced the rebels groups to reunite and refocus the battle. It's no longer only just about toppling President Assad, but also eliminating Al-Qaeda from Syria.
Okay, all right, I thought that might be helpful to an understanding of what's happening in Syria that we continue to watch month after month, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Okay, today, some 4,500 people, including foreign dignitaries, gathered in Qunu for the state funeral of Nelson Mandela. South Africa's first black leader, and as the headnotes say, who led the transition from the white minority ruled, who died on December 5th at the age of 95. You know, the lead-ins, the stories you have to say this sometime, and interesting. He led the transition from white minority rule, and his goal was to get the black majority into rule. And friends, it's kind of an understood thing. You don't say it if the blacks move ahead of the whites. You don't say, well, it was a racist thing then. But if the whites do it against the blacks, well, then you can call it racist. Now, listen, I have a lot of black friends, so don't get me wrong. I'm just telling you the way some things are. And the only way it's going to really get straightened out as to people get along with one another is when Jesus Christ returns, opens up the Holy Spirit to everyone, and the hearts of men are changed, and Jesus Christ, carrying a rod of iron, says, you people will be here, and you people will be here, and so on. And there will be some of us who will be reigning and ruling with Christ to help him carry that out during the millennium of 1,000 years. But let's take a look at this video on today's funeral. I'll give you a little background while this is playing. The funeral of the former South African President Nelson Mandela has taken place.
To the family and friends of our late Commander-in-Chief, may God soothe your grief. May God sanctify your memories. May the grace of the Lord be sufficient now and whenever the longing for Tata becomes unbearable. Rest in peace. Yours was truly a long walk to freedom, and now you have achieved the ultimate freedom in the bosom of your Maker, God Almighty.
Okay, now, God takes the spirit of man and he holds it until a resurrection. And people, those of you who loved Mandela, who did more of a humanitarian thing for his people than anything religious or Christian, you'll get to see him again in a resurrection. But he's buried, and this is news that's going to be going behind us, hopefully. We'll focus on a lot of other things in the future. As I was saying, though, before the men started speaking, I had to stop that Mandela was taken to the place of his boyhood home of Qunu in the Eastern Cape. And I have another video with BBC reporter John Simpson.
It was in this rolling countryside that Nelson Mandela's long walk to freedom began. And by his own wish, it's where it ended today. ceremony was well practiced and highly polished and had a suitable grandeur to it. The world was watching. The best equipped and trained soldiers, sailors and airmen in Africa, by some way, brought their one-time commander-in-chief to the funeral ceremony.
Okay, friends, all right. Let's go on. We've only got a few minutes to go if we keep tonight's report at a half hour. Sometimes I do an hour on Sunday night, but tonight the cold has been getting to me. I want to keep it to a half hour. And let's cover the story that sadly happened in the United States, where a teenager opened fire with a shotgun at a Colorado high school, wounding 2 students before killing himself. The gunman was looking for a specific teacher when confronted by a classmate, police said. James Laidler reports.
Just after midday on Friday, a student from the Arapahoe High School in Centennial, Colorado, came to school with a shotgun. Police say he was looking for a teacher, then shot one of his classmates, leaving them with serious injuries. He then wounded another student before dying from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound.
We cleared the school and secured all of the students very quickly. The suspect has been found inside the school and he has deceased.
The school is just 8 miles from Columbine, where 2 students killed 13 classmates and staff in April 1999. Yesterday's shooting took place a day before the anniversary of the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. 20 children and 6 members of staff died when Adam Lanza opened fire with an assault rifle. Today there will be memorial events and vigils across America to remember those who died. James Laidler, BBC News.
And first, for our last story tonight, the Republican-dominated House of Representatives has passed a 2-year spending plan designed to prevent future shutdowns like the one that forced the government to close 2 weeks.
Be in order.
This week has not been politics as usual. In Washington, a 2-year budget deal could mark a break from political gridlock and avoid another government shutdown.
This agreement makes sure that we don't have a government shutdown scenario in January. It makes sure that we don't have another government shutdown scenario in October. It makes sure that we don't lurch from crisis to crisis.
The government shutdown in October not only hit the US economy, but knocked its international reputation too. This plan, which may help repair its image, is modest. It would ease automatic spending cuts by more than $60 billion and reduce the budget deficit by up to $23 billion over 10 years, only a fraction of the country's economic output. When the plan was first revealed, stocks had their worst day in just over a month. The Dow suffered a triple-digit loss. So why are investors worried? They think it's one more reason for America's central bank to scale back its stimulus measures. With the Senate expected to vote next week, the bipartisan agreement could reach the president's desk before the holidays. But the plan doesn't raise the debt ceiling, setting up another potential showdown for after February. Michelle Fleury, BBC News, New York.
And friends, just real quickly, the spiritually speaking, the uncle in relationship to the United States, the uncle being Esau in Turkey, they are having a big spending problem over there with credit cards. And I'm going to put that off and tell you about that later in the week. I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this Sunday night edition of Nightcast News related to the Bible and prophecy. God willing and the creek don't rise, friends. We'll be back again tomorrow evening, Monday night, with another regular half-hour edition of Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.